The studio lights were already warm when Samuel L. Jackson took his seat, the familiar hum of morning television settling around him like a second skin. He'd done this dance 100 times, polite smiles, measured answers, a few jokes to keep the energy buoyant. Good Morning America was supposed to be easy. Promotional tour stops usually were. You show up, you talk about the project, you shake hands, and you leave. Simple. But there was a tension in the air that morning, the kind that pricked the back of his neck before anyone had said a word. Michael Strahan greeted him with a broad smile, the kind that worked on camera and calmed audiences at home. The pleasantries flowed at first. They talked about Jackson's latest film, the late nights on set, the thrill of working with a younger cast who grew up watching him dominate the screen. Samuel leaned back in his chair, relaxed, cracking a dry joke that sent a ripple of laughter through the studio crew. For a moment, it felt like any other interview. Then the tone shifted. Strahan leaned forward slightly, cue cards rustling almost imperceptibly. "You've been very outspoken lately," he said, his voice still smooth, still friendly. "Some people feel that your comments about Hollywood and accountability have gone a little too far. Do you think you owe anyone an apology?" Samuel's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened. He'd learned long ago how to hold his expression steady, how to let silence do some of the work. "An apology for telling the truth," he replied calmly. "That's a new one." The audience murmured, sensing the change. Cameras adjusted, zooming in just a fraction closer. Strahan nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "Well, critics say you're dismissing other perspectives. That you're—" "Let me stop you right there," Samuel cut in, raising a hand. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "I've listened to other perspectives my whole life. The problem is, some folks only want their version of the story heard." There it was. The edge. The air in the studio seemed to tighten, like a string pulled too far. Strahan shifted in his seat, glancing briefly toward the producers off camera before turning back. "But isn't it part of being a public figure," Strahan pressed, "to accept criticism without turning it into confrontation?" Samuel let out a short breath, almost a laugh. "Criticism is one thing. Twisting my words to fit a headline is another." He leaned forward now, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to talk about my work." The audience applauded softly, unsure whether they were supposed to. Strahan smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes this time. "Of course. But when you make strong statements, people are going to challenge them." "Challenge me," Samuel said, his voice steady but firm. "Don't misrepresent me." The seconds stretched. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer gestured urgently, trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Strahan cleared his throat. "Let's take it back to the film," he said. "There's a scene everyone's talking about. And that's what we should have been talking about from the start," Samuel replied, nodding once. For a brief moment, it seemed like the storm had passed. They discussed the film's themes, the message behind the story, the reason Samuel had signed on in the first place. He spoke passionately, his hands moving as he explained how the script resonated with him, how it reflected issues he'd seen play out both on and off screen. The audience leaned in again, engaged, comfortable. But the calm didn't last. Strahan, perhaps emboldened by the ticking clock and the knowledge that live television thrived on moments, circled back. "You mentioned earlier that some people in the industry need to own up. Are you talking about specific individuals?" Samuel's jaw set. "I'm talking about systems," he said. "If someone feels personally attacked by that, maybe they should ask themselves why." The temperature in the room spiked. Strahan raised his eyebrows. "So you're saying if someone takes offense, that's on them?" "I'm saying," Samuel replied slowly, choosing each word, "that accountability feels like an attack only when you're avoiding it." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. This was no longer a standard morning interview. This was something else entirely. Strahan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Some would argue that your approach shuts down dialogue." Samuel's eyes locked onto his. "No," he said. "What shuts down dialogue is pretending there's nothing to talk about." For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The silence was loud, buzzing in the studio lights. The producers' voices crackled faintly through earpieces, unheard by the audience but felt in the sudden urgency of movement behind the scenes. Samuel straightened, smoothing the front of his jacket. His expression was calm, but there was a finality to it now, a sense that something had shifted beyond repair. "Look," he said, his voice even, "I respect this show. I respect you. But I'm not going to sit here and have my words turned into a gotcha moment." Strahan opened his mouth to respond, but Samuel continued, gently but firmly. "If we're going to talk, let's talk honestly. If not, then maybe this isn't the place for the conversation." The audience held its breath. The cameras stayed trained on Samuel's face as he glanced briefly toward the exit, then back at Strahan. The tension hung heavy, unresolved, as the clock ticked toward the next segment and no one seemed quite sure what would happen next. The moment Samuel L. Jackson stepped away from the set, the studio seemed to exhale all at once, as if it had been holding its breath without realizing it. The camera lingered on the empty chair for half a second too long before cutting wide. Michael Strahan sat there, hands resting on his knees, his usual ease replaced by something closer to disbelief. He glanced toward the producers, then back to the lens, searching for footing in a situation no morning show rundown had prepared him for. Behind the scenes, controlled chaos erupted. Producers whispered urgently into headsets, stage managers waved hands in sharp, clipped motions, and a floor director mouthed, "Commercial, commercial," with an intensity that bordered on panic. The red light blinked, and suddenly the cheerful theme music filled the studio, masking the tension beneath it. At home, viewers blinked at their screens, sensing they had just witnessed something unscripted, something real. Offstage, Samuel moved with quiet purpose down the narrow hallway. The walls were lined with framed photos of past guests, smiling faces frozen in polished moments of television history. He passed them without a glance. A production assistant hesitated as he approached, unsure whether to speak, then simply nodded. Samuel returned the nod, his expression composed. Whatever storm had been brewing inside him, he wasn't letting it spill over. He stopped near the exit, resting one hand briefly on the back of a chair. For a moment, he closed his eyes. Not in anger. In reflection. He'd spent decades navigating interviews, debates, and loaded questions. He knew when a conversation was honest and when it was designed to provoke. This one, he'd decided, had crossed a line. And lines mattered. Back in the studio, the show returned from commercial with noticeably softer lighting and an unmistakably cautious tone. Strahan leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "We want to acknowledge," he began carefully, "that some